She moved into the abandoned ranger station because she had nowhere else to go. She thought it would just be a temporary shelter, a roof over her children's heads until she could figure something out. But when she heard the sound coming from beneath the floorboards on their third night there, a sound that was unmistakably human, she realized that her decision to come to this forgotten place in the Oregon wilderness would change everything. Can you imagine losing everything you've ever known? Being forced to live in a crumbling structure miles from civilization, only to discover that something or someone has been hiding below you the entire time. This might sound like the beginning of a horror story, but what happened to Sarah Williams in the autumn of 1994 was terrifyingly real, and what she found beneath that ranger station wasn't just a mystery, it was a choice that would test every fiber of her being as a mother and as a human. Before we continue, I want you to do something. Think about the most desperate moment of your life, that moment when you felt you had nowhere to turn, no options left. Now imagine that in that moment of total desperation, you stumbled upon someone else's nightmare, someone else's life hanging by a thread. Would you risk everything you have left to save them? Leave your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what your heart would tell you in that moment. And if these kinds of stories move you, if you believe that courage can be found in the darkest places, subscribe to this channel, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after the final word. Sarah Williams was 32 years old when her world fell apart. It was March of 1994, and the morning had started like any other morning in Timber Creek, a small logging town nestled in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. David, her husband, had kissed her goodbye at 5:30 a.m., the way he had every workday for the past 8 years. His coffee thermos was tucked under his arm, his lunch pail swinging at his side. He worked for Thornton Logging Company, one of the last independent operations still running in the area, and he was good at his job. David was a faller, the man who actually cut the trees, and everyone said he had a natural instinct for reading the forest. "Take care of my girls," he'd said, ruffling Emma's hair and planting a kiss on sleeping Lucas's forehead. "Promise me you'll be safe," Sarah had replied, the same words she said every morning, a ritual that felt like a prayer. "Always am, babe, always am." Those were the last words he ever spoke to her. The accident happened at 2:17 p.m., a widowmaker. They called it a dead branch high up in the canopy that no one saw, dislodged by the vibration of David's chainsaw. It came down like a spear, 60 feet of solid Douglas fir heartwood, and it hit him directly in the back of the head. He was dead before his body hit the forest floor. They told Sarah it was instant, that he didn't suffer, as if that knowledge could somehow cushion the blow, as if knowing he didn't feel pain would make the gaping hole in her chest any smaller. The funeral was small. Most of the loggers came, their faces grim and uncomfortable in their dress shirts and ties. Men who were used to mud and sawdust, not grief and formalities. The company sent flowers and a representative, a young man in a cheap suit who read from a prepared statement about workplace safety and tragic accidents. 2 weeks later, that same young man returned with a check. It was for $8,000, the company's final settlement for David's life. $8,000. That's what 12 years of loyal service, of risking his life in those woods every single day, amounted to. That's what a father's life was worth. That's what the company calculated her husband's existence to be valued at. The lawyer she consulted, using money borrowed from her sister, told her the truth she already knew but didn't want to hear. "Mrs. Williams, your husband signed an agreement when he started with Thornton. It's what they call an at-will contract with a liability waiver. Unless you can prove gross negligence, and believe me, they've got that angle covered, this is all you're going to get." "I'm sorry." Sarah took the check. She had no choice. The mortgage on their small 2-bedroom house was $650 a month, and she was already a month behind. There was food to buy, electricity to pay for, and the propane tank was nearly empty. Emma needed new shoes, Lucas needed his asthma inhaler refilled, and the car needed new brakes. $8,000 felt like a fortune and like nothing at all. It was gone in 4 months. She tried everything. She took a job at the Timber Creek diner, working double shifts, coming home with her feet swollen and her back screaming. But the tips were sparse. Most of the loggers were living paycheck to paycheck themselves, and her hourly wage was $4.75, after taxes, child care for Lucas, and gas for her failing car. She was bringing home maybe $600 a month. It wasn't enough. The mortgage company was patient at first, then firm, then hostile. By September, the letters changed from reminder to final notice to foreclosure proceedings initiated. The bank didn't care about her dead husband or her 2 children. They cared about the money she didn't have. On a gray October morning, a man in a leather jacket knocked on her door and handed her an eviction notice. She had 30 days. 30 days to pack up the life she and David had built, to somehow find a new place to live with no money, no credit, and no prospects. She spent those 30 days in a fog of panic and desperation, calling every landlord in the county. But no one wanted to rent to an unemployed widow with 2 kids. The few places she could afford seedy apartments in town with peeling paint and mold in the corners required first month, last month, and a security deposit. She didn't have it. She didn't have anything. On the 28th day, sitting in her soon-to-be former living room with Emma and Lucas sleeping upstairs, Sarah broke down. She cried until there were no tears left, until her body was just a hollow shell making sounds of despair. She thought about her children. She thought about becoming homeless. About the shelter in the city 50 miles away that she'd heard was overcrowded and dangerous. She thought about how she had failed them, how she had failed David's memory. And then, in that moment of absolute rock bottom, she remembered something. Helen Carter, the elderly woman who owned the small general store on the outskirts of town, had mentioned something months ago, right after David's funeral. Sarah had been buying milk and bread with food stamps, and Helen, with her kind, weathered face and gentle eyes, had said something in passing. If you ever need a place, dear, there's that old ranger station up in Sector 7. Been abandoned since the forest service consolidated stations back in '85. It's rough, real rough, but it's got 4 walls on a roof. Nobody goes up there anymore. Too far from everything. You'd need a 4-wheel drive just to reach it, and the road's barely passable, but, well, it's something. At the time, Sarah had just nodded politely, not really hearing, drowning in her grief. But now, with 48 hours until she and her children would be on the street, that throwaway comment became a lifeline. The next morning, she drove to Carter's general store. Helen was behind the counter, sorting through invoices with reading glasses perched on her nose. "Mrs. Carter," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the desperation churning inside her. "That ranger station you mentioned, is it ... could we, is it possible for someone to stay there?" Helen looked up, and in her eyes Sarah saw immediate understanding. There was no judgment, no pity, just the weary recognition of someone who had seen hard times herself. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "you're thinking about going up there, aren't you?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Helen sighed. A long, heavy sound. "It's not on any official records anymore. The Forest Service don't monitor it, don't care about it. It's basically just a forgotten building in the middle of nowhere. The road up is hell, especially this time of year with the rain. There's no electricity, no running water. You'd need to haul water from the creek, chop wood for the stove. It's 20 miles from town on logging roads that aren't maintained." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "But you're desperate, aren't you?" "I have nowhere else to go," Sarah whispered. "They're evicting us in 2 days. I have 2 children, Mrs. Carter. I can't let them end up in some shelter." Helen reached under the counter and pulled out a folded yellowed map. She spread it out, her gnarled finger tracing a route. "Here's how you get there. Take Highway 22 east, about 12 miles past town, then turn north onto Forest Road 46. That's paved for about 3 miles, then it turns to gravel, then to dirt. Keep going for another 8 miles and keep going even when you think you've gone too far until you see a turnoff marked by a big lightning-struck pine. That's the access road to Sector 7. Another 1.5 miles up that road, you'll find the station." She looked Sarah directly in the eyes. "I'm not going to lie to you, dear. It's going to be hard. Harder than anything you've ever done. The place has been empty for almost 10 years. There'll be rot, animals, who knows what else. But it's shelter, and it's free, and no one's going to come looking for you there." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. Helen patted her hand. "Before you go, come back here. I'll put together some supplies for you. And listen to me, you're going to need an axe, a good saw, plenty of candles and matches, heavy tops, and every warm blanket you can get your hands on. Winter comes early up there." Over the next 2 days, Sarah moved with a singular focus born of desperation. She sold everything she couldn't carry, the furniture, David's tools, the television, everything. It broke her heart, but she needed the money for supplies. She got $800 for it all. Money she immediately spent at Helen's store and at the hardware store in town. Axe, saw, 20 boxes of candles, matches, tops, rope, 5-gallon water jugs, a hand-crank lantern, a portable camping stove with propane canisters, dry goods, rice beans, flour, salt, sugar, canned vegetables, canned meat, powdered milk, medicine, aspirin, bandages, Lucas's asthma inhaler, refills, antiseptic, warm clothes, boots, coats. By the time she was done, her 1987 Ford Bronco, the one thing she'd managed to keep because it was fully paid off, was packed so full there was barely room for Emma and Lucas in the back seat. Helen came out to the parking lot as Sarah was loading the last box. She pressed a small bag into Sarah's hands. "Herb seeds," she said quietly, "for next spring, if you make it through the winter. And this," she handed Sarah an old hunting rifle wrapped in an oilcloth, along with a box of ammunition. "There are bears, cougars, and worse up there. You know how to shoot." Sarah nodded. Her father had taught her as a girl. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I don't know how to repay you." "Stay alive," Helen said simply. "Keep those babies safe. That's payment enough." On the morning of November 1st, 1994, Sarah Williams, with her 10-year-old daughter Emma and 7-year-old son Lucas, drove away from the only life they'd ever known and headed into the mountains. The drive was brutal. Highway 22 was fine, but once they turned onto Forest Road 46, the pavement deteriorated rapidly. The gravel portion rattled the Bronco violently, and when they hit the dirt section, it became a nightmare of potholes and washouts. The rain that had been threatening all morning finally started, turning the road into a slick, muddy track. Sarah's hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. Emma sat silently in the back, staring out the window at the endless walls of Douglas fir and western hemlock. Lucas, scared by the rough ride, whimpered occasionally. The lightning-struck pine was easy to spot, a massive, blackened skeleton of a tree that looked like a claw reaching for the gray sky. Sarah turned onto the access road, and immediately the Bronco's tire slipped in the mud. She downshifted, fighting for traction. The road was barely more than 2 ruts with a strip of grass down the middle. Branches scraped the sides of the truck, and more than once Sarah had to stop and move a fallen log out of the way. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, they rounded a bend, and there it was. The ranger station. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering evergreens. Their branches so thick they blocked most of the weak afternoon light. The building was larger than Sarah had expected, a 2-story structure built from rough-hewn logs, now darkened and weathered by years of rain and neglect. The roof was made of cedar shakes, many of them missing or rotting. One of the upstairs windows was broken, and the front door hung slightly ajar, held in place by only one hinge. Moss covered the north side of the building, and blackberry vines had grown up and over the front porch, creating a thorny barrier. It looked less like a shelter and more like a ruin, a skeleton of a building that time had given up on. Emma's voice was small and scared. "Mom, we're not really going to live here, are we?" Sarah turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, she could hear the rain drumming on the roof of the Bronco and the distant sound of the creek Helen had mentioned, rushing somewhere beyond the trees. "Yes, baby," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "This is going to be our home for a while." "It looks haunted," Lucas whispered, his eyes wide. "It's not haunted," Sarah said firmly. "It's just old and needs some love. We're going to fix it up, make it cozy. You'll see. It'll be an adventure." She didn't believe her own words, but she said them anyway. That's what mothers do. Sarah got out of the truck, the cold rain immediately soaking through her jacket. She waded through the blackberry vines, tearing her jeans in the process, and pushed the broken door open. It gave with a groan that echoed through the empty rooms. The smell hit her first: damp wood, animal droppings, mold, and decay. The interior was in even worse shape than the exterior. The main room, which must have once been the ranger's office, was a mess of broken furniture, shattered glass, and layers of dirt and pine needles that had blown in through the broken windows. Graffiti covered one wall, names and dates from teenagers who'd probably used this place as a party spot years ago. Beer cans littered the floor, along with the remains of a campfire that someone had built right in the middle of the room, the scorch marks still visible on the floorboards. To the left was a small kitchen area with a rusted sink and an old wood-burning stove. To the right was a steep staircase leading to the second floor. Straight ahead, through a doorway, Sarah could see what looked like a back room. She ventured further in, her boots crunching on broken glass. The back room was smaller, probably once used for storage or as living quarters. It had a stone fireplace that was good, that could provide heat. The floor was rough planks, and there were holes in a few places where the wood had rotted through, but the ceiling seemed mostly intact. There was even a window with glass still in it, though it was caked with grime. Upstairs was more of the same: 2 small rooms, one with the broken window, both filled with debris. But again, the structure seemed sound. The roof had leaks, but it wasn't completely caved in. The walls were solid. It wasn't much, but it was 4 walls and a roof, just like Helen had said, and it was theirs. As Sarah stood there in the dim, cold room, listening to the rain and the creaks of the old building, she felt the weight of the decision she'd made. This was insane. She had brought her children to a crumbling shack in the middle of the wilderness, 20 miles from the nearest town, with winter coming on fast. No electricity, no heat except what they could generate, no running water. But what choice did she have? This or the street? This or a shelter where she'd heard stories of children being taken away by social services, families being split up? At least here, they were together. At least here, they had a chance. She went back to the Bronco and opened the door. Emma and Lucas looked at her with fearful, expectant eyes. "Okay," Sarah said, squaring her shoulders. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to unload the truck, and we're going to make that back room livable tonight. We'll clean it, seal the windows, get the fireplace going. Emma, you're in charge of sweeping. Lucas, you help your sister carry the light stuff. I'll handle everything else. We work together, and we survive together. Got it?" Emma, bless her heart, nodded seriously. She'd always been mature for her age, and David's death had aged her even more. She reached for Lucas's hand. "Got it, Mom. We can do this." Those words, spoken by her 10-year-old daughter, gave Sarah the strength she needed. They could do this. They had to. The first 3 days were a hell of cleaning, hauling, and making do. Sarah worked from dawn to dusk, and even Emma and Lucas did their part. They cleared the back room of debris, swept out years of accumulated filth, and patched the holes in the floor with pieces of plywood Sarah cut from old packing crates. She sealed the window with layers of plastic sheeting and duct tape to keep the cold out. The stone fireplace, once she'd cleared the chimney of bird nests and debris, drew beautifully, and soon they had a fire going that warmed the small space. She hung tarps over the doorways to trap the heat, creating a cozy if crude living space. The first night, they slept together on the floor, huddled under every blanket they had, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. The sounds of the forest were loud, and unfamiliar branches scraping against the walls. The distant hoot of an owl, something that might have been a cougar screaming in the distance. Lucas cried softly, and Emma held him. Sarah lay awake, her mind racing, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But as the days passed, they fell into a routine. Sarah set up a makeshift kitchen in the corner of the room, with a camping stove for cooking and a folding table for prep. They ate simply rice and beans, canned stew, biscuits made in a cast-iron skillet over the fire. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it filled their bellies. Every morning, Sarah hiked down to the creek with the 5-gallon jugs and hauled water back. It was exhausting work, but the water was cold and clear, and after boiling it, it was safe to drink. She taught Emma and Lucas how to wash dishes with minimal water, how to layer clothes for warmth, how to conserve the candles. They were learning to survive. On the evening of the third day, after the kids had finally fallen asleep, Sarah sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her body ached. Her hands were blistered from the axe and the saw. She was exhausted in a way that went bone deep, but they were still together. They had food, water, and shelter. Against all odds, they were making it. That's when she heard it. At first, she thought it was just the wind or the old building settling, but then it came again, a low, rhythmic sound, like something heavy being dragged across wood. It was coming from beneath the floor. Sarah froze. Her heart hammered in her chest. She strained to listen, and there it was again. Not the skittering of mice or the rustle of leaves. It was deliberate. It was human. Someone or something was below them, and they were not alone. Sarah didn't move. She sat frozen by the fire, her ears straining against the silence that had fallen after that last sound. The wood in the fireplace popped and hissed, and outside, the wind moaned through the trees. But beneath those familiar sounds, there was something else, a presence, a weight. The undeniable knowledge that she was not imagining things. Something was below her. Someone was below her. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. An animal. Now the sound had been too deliberate, too rhythmic. A vagrant who'd been living here before they arrived. That made more sense. But why would they be hiding underneath the building? And how would they have gotten down there? She hadn't seen a cellar door or any kind of access point. The rational part of her brain, the part that had kept her functioning through David's death and everything that followed, told her to wake the kids, get in the Bronco and drive away. But where would they go? They had no money, no options. This place, as terrifying as it suddenly felt, was all they had. She couldn't run, not yet, not without knowing. Moving slowly, Sarah stood up. Her hand found the heavy maglite flashlight she kept near the door, its weight reassuring in her palm. She also grabbed the axe she'd been using to split firewood. It wasn't a weapon, but it could be if necessary. Emma and Lucas were asleep in their nest of blankets near the fire, exhausted from another day of hard work. Sarah glanced at them, her heart clenching. Whatever she was about to do, she had to be smart. She had to protect them. She walked carefully across the room, testing each floorboard before putting her full weight on it, listening. The sound didn't come again. Maybe she'd imagined it after all. Maybe it was just a building settling, or an animal burrowing underneath. Old structures made strange noises, but even as she tried to convince herself, she knew better. That had been human. She was sure of it. Sarah knelt down and examined the floor more carefully. The planks were old, rough-cut timber, some of them warped and split with age. She ran her hands along the seams, looking for anything unusual. And then, near the back corner of the room, hidden beneath a small area rug they'd laid down to cover some of the worst rot, she found it. A section of the floor that didn't quite match the rest. The boards here were slightly different, newer maybe, or at least replaced more recently than the others. And there was a gap. Not natural, but deliberate, a seam that ran in a rectangle, about 3 feet by 4 feet. Her pulse quickened. She moved the rug aside completely and used the axe handle to tap on the boards. The sound was hollow. There was definitely empty space beneath. Using the blade of the axe carefully, she pried at the edge of one of the boards. It resisted at first, then gave with a sharp crack that sounded deafening in the quiet room. Sarah froze, glancing back at her sleeping children. Neither of them stirred. She pried up another board, then another. Beneath them was darkness, and the smell of earth and something else, something metallic and bitter. Blood. Sarah's hands shook as she shone the flashlight down into the opening. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small space carved out beneath the floor. Not a proper basement, but a crawl space, maybe 4 feet deep. The ground was bare earth, and the walls were the exposed foundation stones of the ranger station. And there, pressed against the far wall, was a person, a young man, barely more than a kid, maybe early 20s. He was curled into a tight ball, his face turned away from the light, his body trembling. His clothes, jeans, and what had once been a dark green jacket were torn and filthy, covered in mud and dark stains that Sarah recognized with a sickening lurch as blood. One of his legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, at the sound of her voice. The young man flinched violently and tried to push himself further into the corner, a whimper of pain escaping his lips. "No," he gasped, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "Please, no. Don't tell them, please." Sarah's maternal instinct overrode her fear. This wasn't a threat. This was someone hurt, someone terrified, someone who needed help. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, keeping her voice low and calm. "I'm not going to tell anyone. My name is Sarah. We just moved in here a few days ago. I didn't know anyone was down there." The young man turned his head slightly, just enough for the flashlight to catch his face. Sarah's stomach turned. His face was a mess of bruises, swollen and discolored. One eye was nearly swollen shut, his lip was split, and there was a deep gash across his forehead that had bled profusely but was now crusted over with dried blood. He looked like he'd been beaten within an inch of his life. You're not with them," he managed to say, his one good eye focusing on her with desperate hope. "With who?" Sarah asked, though a cold dread was already forming in her chest. "Thornton," he whispered. "Thornton Logging, the sheriff. Are you with them?" The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Thornton Logging, the company that had employed David, the company that had paid her $8,000 for his life and walked away clean. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not with anyone. I'm a widow with 2 kids. We're squatting here because we have nowhere else to go." The young man's face crumpled with relief, and tears leaked from his eyes, cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "Thank God," he breathed. "Oh, thank God." Sarah made a decision. "I'm coming down," she said. "Don't be afraid. I'm going to help you." She lowered herself through the opening, dropping the last foot to the earthen floor. The space was cramped and cold, and the smell of blood and unwashed body was strong. Up close, the young man looked even worse. His injuries weren't just on his face. His hands were torn and bloodied, his fingernails broken, as if he'd been clawing at something. His jacket was soaked with blood from multiple wounds, and his broken leg was swollen to nearly twice its normal size. "How long have you been down here?" Sarah asked gently. "I don't know," he said, his voice wavering. "Days, maybe a week. I lost track." A week. He'd been suffering down here for a week, injured and alone, probably assuming he was going to die in this dark hole. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Tyler," he said. "Tyler Brooks." "Okay, Tyler. I'm going to help you, but I need you to tell me what happened. Who did this to you? And why are you hiding?" Tyler closed his eyes, and for a moment Sarah thought he might pass out, but then he opened them again and began to speak, his words coming in halting, painful bursts. He was an environmental activist, he told her, part of a small group from Portland who had been monitoring illegal logging operations in the national forests around the Cascade Mountains. For months they'd been documenting Thornton Logging Company's activities, cutting in protected areas, falsifying permits, taking old-growth timber that was supposed to be off. They'd collected evidence, taken photographs, recorded GPS coordinates. Tyler and his partner, a woman named Jessica, had been deep in the forest, photographing a massive clear-cut operation in an area that was protected habitat for the northern spotted owl. They'd been careful, staying hidden, using telephoto lenses, but somehow, they'd been spotted. "They came after us," Tyler said, his voice breaking. "We ran, we got separated. I heard Jessica scream, and then I heard a gunshot." Sarah felt ice form in her veins. "They killed her." "I don't know," Tyler said, anguish in his voice. "I hope not. I pray not. But I couldn't go back. They were hunting me. I could hear them crashing through the brush, calling to each other. I ran for hours, all through the night. I fell down a ravine, broke my leg on a rock, but I kept going. I knew if they caught me, I was dead." He'd managed to make it to the ranger station just before dawn, he explained. He'd been here before, scoping it out as a potential observation post. He knew the building was abandoned. He'd found the crawl space, an old root cellar that had been partially filled in, and hidden himself there, pulling the floorboards back into place. "I thought they'd give up looking," he said, "but they didn't. They came here. 3 of them. I could hear them walking round above me, tearing the place apart, looking. One of them, I recognized his voice. It was Sheriff Kowalski." Sarah's blood ran cold. "The sheriff, the law, the person who was supposed to protect people. What did they say?" "That I was a terrorist," Tyler said bitterly. "That I was trying to destroy the local economy, take away people's jobs, that people like me were the enemy. The sheriff said if they found me, they'd make it look like an accident. Said the forest was dangerous, lots of ways for a tree hugger to get hurt and never be found. They'd searched for hours," Tyler said, and he'd held his breath in the darkness below, praying they wouldn't find the hidden access. Eventually they'd left, but not before one of them. Tyler thought it was Marcus Thornton himself. The company's owner said something that chilled his blood. "Keep watching this place. If he's alive, he might come back, and if anyone else shows up asking questions, we need to know about it." After that, Tyler had been too terrified to move. He'd lain in the dark, his legs screaming with pain, slowly dehydrating and bleeding. He'd heard Sarah and her kids arrive, heard them moving around, but he didn't know if he could trust them. What if they were connected to Thornton? What if calling out would bring the men back? So he'd stayed silent, waiting, hoping, until tonight, when the pain and desperation had overcome his caution, and he'd made a sound he couldn't suppress. "I'm so sorry," he said now, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I know I've put you in danger just by being here. If they find out you're helping me, they'll stop," Sarah said firmly. She sat back on her heels, her mind racing. This was insane. This was beyond anything she'd imagined. She'd stumbled into something dark and dangerous, a conspiracy that involved murder and corruption at the highest local levels. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to pretend she'd never found him, to close up the floor, pack up her kids, and drive away. Let Tyler Brooks and his crusade be someone else's problem. But as she looked at his battered face, at the hope and fear warring in his eyes, she saw David. She saw the man who'd kissed his children goodbye every morning and gone into the woods to do dangerous work for a company that valued profit over people. She saw herself, desperate and alone, clinging to survival by her fingernails, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she couldn't walk away. "Not from this. I'm going to help you," she said. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to help you." "You can't," Tyler said desperately. "You have kids." "I heard them. You can't risk I have kids," Sarah agreed. "And I'm going to teach them that you don't turn your back on someone who needs help, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous." She climbed back up through the opening and stood in her makeshift home looking down at the injured young man. Her children slept peacefully by the fire, unaware of the choice their mother had just made, a choice that would put all of their lives at risk. But Sarah had learned something in the months since David's death. She'd learned that the world was full of people who chose the easy path, the safe path, the path that protected their own interests at the expense of others. She'd learned that companies like Thornton Logging valued money over lives, that systems of power protected themselves first and everyone else never. And she'd learned that sometimes the only way to survive with your soul intact was to do the hard thing, the dangerous thing, the right thing. She looked back down at Tyler. "First things first," she said. "We need to get you out of there, get you cleaned up, and deal with that leg. Then we're going to figure out what to do next." "Mrs. Sarah," Tyler said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. You're saving my life." "Maybe," Sarah said quietly. "Or maybe I'm condemning all of us. But we're going to find out together." She spent the next 3 hours working in absolute silence, terrified of waking Emma and Lucas. Getting Tyler out of the crawlspace was an ordeal that left both of them gasping with pain and effort. His broken leg made every movement agony, and Sarah had to support most of his weight as she half-dragged, half-lifted him through the opening. By the time she got him settled on a blanket near the fire butt on the opposite side from her sleeping children, she was drenched in sweat and her arms were shaking with exhaustion. She examined his injuries as best she could in the firelight. The leg was definitely broken, badly, probably in multiple places. It was hot to the touch and had an angry red color spreading from the break point infection setting in. His other injuries, the cuts, the bruises, the split lip were painful but not like. But that leg was bad. He needed a doctor, a hospital, proper care, all things she couldn't provide without exposing him. Sarah did what she could. She cleaned his wounds with boiled water and the last of her rubbing alcohol, biting her lip as Tyler stifled his screams in a rolled-up blanket. She fashioned a splint from 2 pieces of wood and strips torn from an old shirt, binding his leg as tightly as she dared. She gave him aspirin, 3 times the recommended dose, and water, which he drank greedily when she was done. Tyler lay back, his face gray with pain but his eyes clearer than before. "You're pretty good at this," he managed. "I was a nurse's aide before I got married," Sarah said. "A long time ago, but some things you don't forget." She sat back and looked at him seriously. "Tyler, I need you to understand something. I'm going to do everything I can to help you, but my children come first, always. If helping you puts them in danger, I will make the choice that keeps them safe. Do you understand?" Tyler nodded. "I understand, and I don't blame you. If I were in your position, I'd do the same." Good. Sarah pulled a blanket over him. "Now rest. Tomorrow we're going to figure out what comes next." As she lay down next to her children, Sarah stared up at the dark ceiling and listened to Tyler's labored breathing. She'd made her choice, but choices had consequences, and in the deep Oregon wilderness, with winter closing in and dangerous men hunting for the boy hidden in her home, those consequences might be more terrible than she could imagine. She'd walked into this ranger station thinking it would be a refuge. Instead, she'd found a nightmare, and tomorrow, that nightmare would begin in earnest. Sarah woke to the sound of Emma's voice, high and frightened. Mom, there's a man here." She bolted upright, disoriented for a moment, then remembered everything with crashing clarity. Tyler the crawlspace. The choice she'd made in the dark hours of the night. Emma was standing near the fire, pointing at Tyler with wide, terrified eyes. Lucas was awake now too, crying and clutching his sister's leg. Tyler, for his part, had pushed himself up on one elbow and was trying to look as non-threatening as possible, which was difficult given his battered appearance. "It's okay," Sarah said quickly, moving to her children and pulling them close. "It's okay. I know he's here. He's not going to hurt you." "Who is he?" Emma demanded, her voice shaking. "Why is he here?" "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath. She'd known this moment would come. but she hadn't prepared for it. How did you explain something like this to a 10-year-old? His name is Tyler, she said carefully. He's hurt, and he needs our help. Some bad people hurt him, and he's hiding from them. I found him last night, and I decided we're going to help him. What kind of bad people? Emma asked. She was scared, but Sarah could see her daughter's mind working, processing, trying to understand. People who don't want anyone to know about the bad things they're doing, Sarah said. It was the simplest version of the truth. Tyler saw things he wasn't supposed to see, and now they're looking for him. Lucas had stopped crying and was peeking around his sister, looking at Tyler with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Is he a superhero? He asked in a small voice. Tyler, despite his pain, managed a weak smile. No, buddy, I'm not a superhero. I'm just a regular person who tried to do the right thing and got in trouble for it. Like David and Goliath, Emma said suddenly. Sarah looked at her daughter in surprise. Emma had always loved the Bible stories their grandmother used to tell. David fought the giant because it was the right thing to do, even though he was just a kid with a slingshot. Is that what you did? Something like that, Tyler said softly. Emma studied him for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. She walked over and sat down next to him, her young face serious. My dad died, she said matter. His company said it was an accident, but Mom thinks they were lying. They gave us money and told us to go away. Tyler's eyes met Sarah's over Emma's head, understanding and sympathy in them. I'm sorry about your dad, he said to Emma. That's not fair. No, Emma agreed. It's not. She looked back at her mother. Are we going to help him, Mom? Really? Sarah felt a swell of pride and terror in equal measure. Her daughter was so brave, so good, but that goodness might get them all killed. Yes, she said firmly. We're going to help him. But Emma, Lucas, you have to understand how serious this is. The people looking for Tyler are very dangerous. They can't know he's here. You can't tell anyone about him. Not if someone comes to visit, not if we go into town, not ever. Can you promise me that? Emma nodded solemnly. I promise, Lucas. Sarah looked at her son. Lucas was chewing on his thumb, a nervous habit he'd developed since David died. I promise to, he whispered. Good. Sarah stood up, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Now, let's have breakfast, and then we have work to do. The next few days fell into a new, strange routine. Sarah quickly realized that hiding Tyler was going to be far more complicated than she'd initially thought. The ranger station might be isolated, but it wasn't invisible. Helen Carter from the general store had known about it, which meant others did too. And if Thornton's men were watching the place, as Tyler feared, any suspicious activity could bring them back. During the day, Tyler stayed in the back room, hidden behind the hung tops. Sarah moved some of their supplies to create a small, concealed space for him in the corner. If anyone came to the door, he was to remain absolutely silent and still. It was a crude hiding spot, but it was the best they could do without arousing suspicion by making more elaborate modifications to the building. Tyler's leg remained the biggest concern. Despite Sarah's makeshift splint and the aspirin she gave him every few hours, the infection was spreading. The skin around the break had turned an angry parrot, and Tyler developed a fever that left him shivering one moment and sweating the next. He tried to hide it, to insist he was fine, but Sarah knew better. You need antibiotics, she told him on the third morning, pressing her hand to his burning forehead. That infection is going to kill you if we don't do something. I'll be okay, Tyler said, though his voice was weak. It's not worth the risk of going into town. I'm not asking your permission, Sarah said bluntly. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Today, I'm going into Timber Creek to Helen's store. I'm going to see if she can help. Sarah, you can't. If they're watching, if they see you, then I'll be careful, Sarah interrupted. But Tyler, I didn't pull you out of that hole just to watch you die of sepsis. So either you trust me to do this, or she trailed off, because there was no or this was happening whether he liked it or not. The drive into Timber Creek took 45 minutes on the muddy logging roads. Sarah left Emma and Lucas with strict instructions. Stay inside, keep quiet, and if anyone comes to the door, don't answer it. Emma, who had taken to her role as Tyler's protector with fierce determination, had nodded seriously and taken up position near the window with the hunting rifle. Sarah had shown her how to load it, praying she'd never have to use it. If something happens, Sarah had said, if bad men come, you take Lucas and you run into the forest. You hide, and you don't come out until I come back for you. Do you understand? I understand, Emma had said, and Sarah believed she did. Her daughter had grown up too fast, but that maturity might save her life. Helen Carter was behind the counter when Sarah walked into the general store, just as she'd been every time Sarah had visited. The old woman looked up, her sharp eyes immediately registering something in Sarah's expression. Trouble? She asked simply, as soon as the door closed behind Sarah. I need antibiotics, Sarah said quietly. Strong ones, and I can't ask questions or fill out paperwork. Can you help me? Helen's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. This for you or your kids? No, the ranger station, Helen said. Not a question. There's someone else up there, isn't there? Sarah felt her stomach drop. How did you? I didn't, Helen said calmly. Not until just now. But I've seen that look before, honey. That's the look of someone protecting somebody. And you wouldn't need to sneak antibiotics for yourself. She studied Sarah for a long moment. You going to tell me who? The less you know, the safer you are, Sarah said. Helen snorted. I'm 83 years old. Dear, safety isn't my primary concern anymore, but I respect the discretion. She moved from behind the counter to a locked cabinet near the back of the store. Now, I'm not a pharmacy, but I keep some things on hand for emergencies. Farm, country, you understand. Animals get sick, and sometimes people do too, and the nearest doctor is an hour away. She pulled out a white box and returned to the counter. This is a muck. It's strong, broad spec, good for infections. But whoever's taking it needs to finish the entire course, even if they start feeling better. Otherwise, the infection comes back worse. You understand? I understand, Sarah said, relief flooding through her. Helen, I can't thank you enough. Yes, you can, Helen said, sliding the box across the counter. You can keep yourself and those babies safe, and you can be careful. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. There's been talk in town. Sheriff Kowalski has been asking questions, putting out feelers, looking for someone. A man, young, dark hair, says he's dangerous, might be armed. Says he's connected to some eco-terrorist group that's been threatening the logging operations. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What kind of questions? Asked if anyone's seen strangers around, anyone new in the area. Specifically mentioned the old ranger stations and hunting cabins. Said there's a reward for information. $5,000. $5,000. In a town like Timber Creek where most people lived paycheck to paycheck, that was a fortune. That was enough to tempt almost anyone. Did anyone mention me? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Helen said. You're new, but you're not a stranger. People know you're David Williams' widow, the woman who got a raw deal from Thornton. Most folks here don't have much love for the company, even if they work for it. They're not likely to turn on one of their own. She paused. But $5,000 is a lot of money, Sarah. Loyalty only goes so far when there are bills to pay. You need to be very, very careful. Sarah nodded numbly. How much for the antibiotic? No charge, Helen said. Consider it my contribution to whatever cause you're supporting. But Sarah, she reached across the counter and gripped Sarah's hand with surprising strength. Whatever you're mixed up in, it's dangerous. I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, Sarah said honestly. She left the store with the antibiotics hidden in her coat pocket and drove back to the ranger station with her heart in her throat, watching every vehicle that passed, every truck parked on the side of the road, convinced that at any moment, Sheriff Kowalski would pull her over and discover her secret. But she made it back without incident. Tyler took the first dose of antibiotics that night, and by the next morning his fever had already started to break. The infection would take time to heal completely, but he was going to live. Sarah felt the first glimmer of something like hope. Maybe they could do this. Maybe they could survive. That hope lasted exactly 3 more days. On the afternoon of the 8th day since she'd found Tyler, Sarah was outside chopping firewood while Emma and Lucas played nearby. Tyler was inside, resting, his leg finally showing signs of improvement. The sound of an engine made Sarah freeze mid-swing. A truck was coming up the access road, moving slowly, deliberately. She dropped the axe and grabbed Emma and Lucas. Inside, she hissed. Now quiet. They ran. Sarah slammed the door behind them and looked at Tyler, who had gone pale. Someone's coming, she said. Hide now. Tyler dragged himself into his concealed corner, and Sarah pulled the top across it, then arranged some boxes in front of it to make it look natural. Emma and Lucas huddled near the fireplace, their eyes wide. Sarah took a breath, smoothed her hair, and forced herself to walk back outside just as the truck pulled into the clearing. It was a sheriff's vehicle, dark green with the county seal on the door, and behind the wheel was a man Sarah had seen before at David's funeral. Standing in the back, watching with cold, calculating eyes, Sheriff Raymond Kowalski. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle, with a face that might have been handsome once but had hardened with age and, Sarah suspected, cruelty. He stepped out of the truck slowly, his hand resting casually on the service weapon holstered at his hip. Afternoon, he called out, his voice deceptively friendly. You must be Mrs. Williams. Mind if I have a word? Sarah's mouth was dry, but she forced a smile. Of course, Sheriff, what can I do for you? Kowalski walked toward her, his eyes scanning the ranger station, taking in every detail. Hell of a place you've got here, remote. Private, must be hard, living way out here with 2 kids and winter coming on. We're managing, Sarah said. Her hands were shaking, so she crossed her arms to hide them. I'm surprised you've made it up the road. It's in pretty rough shape. I've driven worse, Kowalski said. He stopped a few feet from her, and Sarah could smell cigarette smoke and coffee on him. I'm actually here on official business. We're looking for someone. Figured I'd check with all the remote properties in the area. See if anyone's seen anything unusual. What kind of unusual? Sarah asked, praying her voice sounded normal. Kowalski pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket and handed it to her. It was a flyer with a driver's license photo of Tyler, clean-shaven and smiling, looking nothing like the battered, bearded man currently hiding 10 feet away. Tyler Brooks, Kowalski said, 23 years old, about 6 feet tall, dark hair, He's wanted in connection with vandalism, trespassing, and assault on a logging crew about 2 weeks ago. Dangerous individual, possibly armed. There's a reward for information leading to his capture. $5,000. Sarah looked at the flyer, forcing herself to study it as if she was seeing Tyler for the first time. I haven't seen anyone, she said finally, handing it back. Like I said, we're pretty isolated up here. Don't get many visitors. Kowalski nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. You sure about that? Because we have reason to believe he might be hiding out in this area. These old ranger stations, they're perfect for someone trying to stay off the grid. And this one in particular, well, it's got a history. People have hidden here before. I'm sure, Sarah said firmly. It's just me and my kids. And honestly, Sheriff, if there was a dangerous man around, I'd be the first person to call you. I have children to protect. That seemed to satisfy him, at least partially. But then he looked past her, toward the ranger station. Mind if I take a look inside? Just to be thorough, for your safety as much as anything. Sarah's heart stopped. Of course, she heard herself say, because what else could she say? Refusing would make her look guilty, would confirm his suspicions. It's a mess, though. We're still fixing the place up. She led him toward the door, her mind racing. Tyler was hidden, but barely. If Kowalski did a thorough search, if he moved those boxes, if he looked behind that tarp, they were finished. All of them. She opened the door, and Emma and Lucas looked up from where they sat near the fire. Kowalski gave them a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Afternoon, kids. You two doing okay out here in the woods? Emma, bless her, didn't hesitate. Yes, sir, we like it. It's like camping. That's good. That's real good. Kowalski's eyes swept the room, lingering on the tarps, the boxes, the general disarray. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. He took a step toward the back corner, toward Tyler's hiding spot, and Sarah felt the world narrow to that single moment. This was it. This was where it all ended. But then Lucas coughed a wet, rattling cough that was real, not faked. His asthma had been acting up in the cold, damp conditions. Kowalski turned back, frowning. That boy's sick. Asthma, Sarah said quickly. The cold weather makes it worse. I've been trying to keep the place warm, but... She let the sentence trail off, a mother's worry evident in her voice. Kowalski nodded, and Sarah saw something shift in his expression, not sympathy exactly, but a kind of dismissal. A sick kid, a desperate widow, a falling apart building in the middle of nowhere. This wasn't where a fugitive would hide. This was just poverty and bad luck. Well, he said, turning back toward the door, you folks take care. And if you do see anything suspicious, anyone hanging around, anyone asking for food or help, you call the station right away. You hear? Don't try to handle it yourself. I will, Sarah promised. Thank you, Sharif. She walked him back to his truck, standing in the cold afternoon air and watching as he climbed in. He rolled down the window. Mrs. Williams, he said, his tone casual but his eyes hard. I knew your husband. Good man. Shame what happened to him. But if you're smart, you'll keep your head down and take care of your family. Don't get involved in things that don't concern you. People who stick their necks out in this county tend to lose them. You understand what I'm saying? I understand, Sarah said, meeting his gaze. She understood perfectly. That was a threat. Kowalski nodded, satisfied, and drove away. Sarah stood there until the sound of his engine faded completely, until she was sure he was gone. Then her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees in the mud, shaking violently. She'd done it. She'd lied to a sheriff's face, hidden a fugitive, and somehow gotten away with it. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't over. Kowalski suspected something. He'd left, but he'd be back, or he'd send someone else. The net was tightening, and Sarah and her children were right in the middle of it. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay on the floor next to her children, staring at the dark ceiling, replaying every moment of Kowalski's visit in her mind. The way he'd looked at her, the way his hand had rested on his gun, the warning he'd given her about sticking her neck out. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to keep watching, enough to come back. And when he did, she needed to be ready. Tyler's voice cut through the darkness, low and urgent. Sarah, you still awake? Yeah, she whispered back. We need to talk. Sarah got up carefully, stepping over her sleeping children, and moved to where Tyler lay in his corner. His fever had broken completely, and though his leg was still splintered and painful, the angry red infection had faded to pink. He was healing, but they were running out of time. I have to leave, Tyler said as soon as she sat down. Tonight. Tomorrow at the latest. Kowalski knows something's wrong. He'll be back, and next time he'll search more thoroughly, or he'll bring backup. I can't let you and your kids take that risk anymore. You can barely walk, Sarah pointed out. How exactly do you plan to leave? Crawl 20 miles through the forest, if I have to. Tyler's jaw was set with determination. Sarah, you don't understand what these people are capable of. I've seen it. My partner Jessica, his voice cracked. We were documenting their operations for months. We had evidence of systematic violations, clear-cutting in protected areas, bribing Forest Service officials. We were going to take it to the State Environmental Agency, to the media, and they knew it. He took a shaky breath. The night they came after us, it wasn't random. They were waiting. They knew exactly where we'd be, which meant someone had been following us, tracking us. When Jessica screamed, when I heard that gunshot, he closed his eyes. I should have gone back for her. I should have tried to help. You would have died, Sarah said softly. And then no one would know what happened to either of you. Maybe, but at least I wouldn't be hiding in a hole while other people risked their lives for me. There was such anguish in his voice that Sarah felt her heart break a little. Tyler, look at me. She waited until he opened his eyes. You're not hiding. You're surviving. There's a difference. And I'm not risking my life for you. I'm risking it for what you represent. For the truth. For the idea that people shouldn't be able to get away with murder just because they have money and power. That's a nice thought, Tyler said bitterly. But the truth doesn't mean much when you're dead. No, Sarah agreed. Which is why we're not going to die. We're going to get you out of here. Get you somewhere safe. And then we're going to make sure your evidence sees the light of day. Tyler stared at her. The evidence is gone. They destroyed my camera, all my notes, everything. It's my word against theirs, and I'm the fugitive terrorist while they're upstanding citizens and law enforcement. I've got nothing, are you sure? Sarah asked. You said you and Jessica were working together for months. Did she have copies? Backups? Did you send anything to anyone? Tyler was quiet for a moment, thinking. Jessica was smarter than me, he said slowly. She always kept duplicates of everything. She had a storage unit in Portland where she kept backup hard drives, printed photos, documents, and she was in contact with a journalist at the Oregonian, guy named Michael Chen. She'd been feeding him information, building a relationship, getting ready to break the story wide open. So the evidence still exists, Sarah said, which means you're not just a fugitive. You're a witness. You're the key to taking these people down. Even if that's true, Tyler said, how does it help us now? I can't walk, much less make it to Portland. And even if I could, Thornton's people are looking for me. They've probably got someone watching Jessica's apartment, her storage unit, anywhere I might turn up. Sarah was quiet, thinking hard. Tyler was right, getting him to Portland in his current condition was impossible. But there might be another way. What if we brought the journalist here? She said suddenly. Tyler looked at her like she was crazy. What? This Michael Chen? If Jessica trusted him, if he was already working on the story, then he's our best shot. We get him up here, you tell him everything. He gets the evidence from the storage unit, and he publishes the story. Once it's public, Thornton can't just make you disappear. The whole state will be watching. Sarah, you're talking about bringing a reporter to a remote location where a corrupt sheriff is actively hunting for me. That's insane. Everything about this situation is insane, Sarah countered. But it's also our only option. Tyler, you said it yourself, you can't stay here, and you can't leave on your own. So either we do something active, something bold, or we just sit here waiting for Kowalski to come back with a warrant and a dozen deputies. Tyler was silent for a long moment. Even if I agreed, he said finally, how would you contact this guy? We don't have a phone up here, and if you use one in town, it could be traced. Helen, Sarah said, the woman at the general store. She's already helped us once, and she's no friend of Thornton. She has a phone, and she's smart enough to be discreet. You're asking her to risk a lot, I know, but I think she will. Sarah surprised herself with how certain she sounded. I think she's been waiting for someone to stand up to these people for a long time. The next morning, Sarah made another trip to Timber Creek. This time, she brought Emma with her, leaving Lucas with strict instructions to stay hidden and quiet with Tyler. She needed Emma to help carry supplies, but more than that, she needed her daughter to see what courage looked like, to understand that sometimes you had to take risks for the right reasons. Helen was stocking shelves when they arrived. She took one look at Sarah's face and sent her assistant on a long, invented errand to the back storeroom. As soon as they were alone, Sarah explained everything: who Tyler was, what had happened to him, what she needed Helen to do. The old woman listened without interrupting, her weathered hands folded on the counter, her expression unreadable. When Sarah finished, Helen was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to make a phone call that could bring a world of trouble down on all of us, she said finally. I am, Sarah admitted, and I know I don't have the right to ask. But Helen, these people killed Tyler's partner. Maybe they killed my husband too, made it look like an accident to cover up their safety violations. How many other people have they hurt? How many more will they hurt if someone doesn't stop them? Helen's eyes were sharp and sad. You know what you're doing, don't you? You're going to war. A war you probably can't win, maybe, Sarah said. But I'd rather lose fighting than win by looking the other way. Helen smiled then, a small, fierce smile that made her look decades younger. Your husband would be proud of you, Sarah Williams. And damn the consequences, so am I. She reached under the counter and pulled out an old rotary phone. Give me the name and number. Michael Chen answered on the third ring. Helen, speaking in a calm, measured tone, identified herself as a friend of Jessica's, said she had information about Tyler Brooks, and gave him very specific instructions. Come alone, tell no one, bring camping gear and be prepared to hike. She gave him directions to a trailhead 15 miles from the ranger station and told him to be there in 2 days at dawn. if you're not alone. If I see any sign that you've been followed or that you've contacted anyone, you'll never find what you're looking for," Helen said. "But if you follow instructions, you'll get the story of your career." There was a long pause. "Then I'll be there." Helen hung up and looked at Sarah. "He's coming. Now comes the hard part, keeping your family alive until he gets here." Those 2 days were the longest of Sarah's life. Every sound made her jump. Every distant engine could be Kowalski returning. She barely slept, and when she did, she had nightmares of men with guns kicking in the door, of her children screaming, of everything going wrong. But she also used the time to prepare. She packed a bag for each of them: clothes, food, water, everything they'd need to run if they had to. She taught Emma the route to the trailhead, made her memorize it, practiced describing it back. She showed her where to hide in the forest if men came, where the creek was, how to follow it downstream to the road. "Why are you teaching me this?" Emma asked, her voice small and scared. "Just in case," Sarah said, trying to keep her tone light. "Just so you know what to do if we ever get separated. But we won't. I'm going to keep you safe, baby. I promise." She wasn't sure if she believed it, but Emma seemed to. Tyler, for his part, was improving steadily. The antibiotics had done their job, and though his leg was still broken and painful, the threat of sepsis had passed. He could stand now, with help, and take a few agonizing steps. It wasn't much, but it was progress. On the second night, he told Sarah and the kids stories about his life before all this, growing up in Seattle, his love of the outdoors, the moment he decided to become an activist. "I was on a camping trip with my dad," he said, staring into the fire. "I was maybe 12. We hiked into this beautiful valley, pristine old-growth forest, trees that had been standing for 500 years. My dad showed me how to identify them, taught me their names: Douglas fir, western red, cedar, Sitka spruce. He said they were living cathedrals, monuments to time." His voice grew soft. "We went back 2 years later. The whole valley had been clear-cut, just stumps and mud and destruction. My dad cried. I'd never seen him cry before. And I thought, someone has to stop this. Someone has to protect these places." "Why you?" Lucas asked. "Because if not me, then who?" Tyler said simply. It was a question that haunted Sarah. Why her? Why had she chosen to get involved? To risk everything? She'd asked herself that 100 times, and every time, the answer was the same. Because, if not her, then who? The morning of the third day arrived cold and misty. Sarah woke before dawn, her stomach tight with anxiety. Today was the day. She roused Emma and gave her final instructions. "You stay here with Lucas and Tyler. Keep the fire going. Keep quiet. I'm going to meet the journalist and bring him back. If I'm not back by noon, if anything happens, you follow the plan we practiced. You understand?" Emma nodded, trying to be brave, but Sarah could see the fear in her eyes. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. So much." Sarah kissed both her children, checked the rifle one more time, and headed out into the gray dawn. The hike to the trailhead took 2 hours, and every step of the way, Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable. She moved quietly, staying off the main trail, using the game paths and deer tracks that Tyler had told her about. By the time she reached the designated meeting spot, she was exhausted and soaked through with sweat and mist. The trailhead was deserted. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought Chen hadn't come, or worse, that he'd betrayed them and led Kowalski right to her. But then she saw movement, a figure emerging from the trees, a man in his 30s with Asian features, wearing hiking gear and carrying a large backpack. He raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. "Sarah Williams," he called softly. "I'm Michael Chen. I came alone, just like you asked." Sarah stepped out of the shadows. "How do I know that?" "You don't," Chen said honestly. "But Jessica trusted me, and I'm hoping you will too. I've been trying to find her for 2 weeks. When I got the call about Tyler, I dropped everything. Please, is he alive? Is he okay?" There was genuine anguish in his voice, genuine concern. Sarah made a decision to trust it. "He's alive. He's hurt, but he's healing. Come with me, and stay quiet. If anyone's watching these woods, we don't want to lead them back." They hiked in silence, Chen following Sarah's lead as she took them on a winding, indirect route back to the ranger station. She was testing him, watching to see if he'd protest the extra distance, if he'd try to take shortcuts. But he followed without complaint, patient and observant. By the time they arrived, Sarah had decided he was legitimate, or at least, she hoped he was. Because if she was wrong, she'd just led a potential enemy right to her family. Tyler's face when he saw Chen walk through the door was a mixture of relief, disbelief, and grief. "Michael," he said, his voice breaking. "Jessica, do you know?" Chi-Chan's expression answered before his words did. "I'm sorry, Tyler, so sorry. They found her body 3 days ago. Gunshot wound. They're calling it a hunting accident." Tyler made a sound like a wounded animal, a raw, primal cry of pain and rage. Sarah moved instinctively to comfort him, but he waved her away, curling in on himself, his body shaking with sobs. Emma and Lucas pressed against their mother, frightened by the intensity of Tyler's grief. Chen waited, patient and respectful, until Tyler's crying subsided into quiet, broken breaths. Then he knelt down beside him. "I know this doesn't help, he said quietly. But she didn't die for nothing. The last time I talked to her, she told me she'd hidden everything, all your evidence, all your documentation. She gave me the location of her storage unit, the access code, everything I'd need if something happened to her. I have it all. Tyler, photos, videos, GPS data, documents proving the violations. Enough to bring criminal charges against Thornton, Kowalski, and at least a dozen others. Tyler looked up, his face ravaged by tears. Then publish it. Publish all of it. Make them pay for what they did to her. I will, Chen promised. But first, I need your testimony. I need you to go on record, to tell me everything you saw, everything that happened. Will you do that? Yes, Tyler said without hesitation. Yes, Jessica died for this. I'm not going to let that be in vain. They spent the next 6 hours in that ranger station, Chen recording every word Tyler spoke, filling in gaps, asking questions, building an airtight case. Sarah listened, horrified by the scope of what Tyler and Jessica had uncovered. It wasn't just illegal logging, it was a systemic conspiracy involving bribes, falsified permits, intimidation, and now murder. All of it protected by a corrupt sheriff and enabled by a community too scared or too dependent on Thornton's money to speak out. When they were finally done, Chen packed away his recorder and looked at Sarah and Tyler seriously. This story breaks tomorrow morning, the front page of the Oregonian, and I've already contacted the state attorney general's office. By noon tomorrow, there will be investigators crawling all over Thornton logging, and Kowalski will be suspended pending investigation. What about Tyler? Sarah asked. What happens to him? He needs to come with me, Chen said. I can get him to Portland, get him medical attention, and most importantly, get him into protective custody. Once the story breaks, he's going to be the star witness in a major criminal case. The state will protect him. Tyler looked at Sarah. What about you? They're going to know you helped me. Kowalski's going to come after you. Let him, Sarah said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. By tomorrow, the whole state will know what's been happening here. He can't touch me without everyone knowing why. And besides, she looked at her children, at Emma's brave face and Lucas's wide eyes. We're survivors. We'll be okay. Chen stood up. We need to leave now before dark. The longer Tyler stays here, the more danger you're all in. Sarah nodded. It was time. She helped Tyler to his feet, supported him as he took his first painful steps toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and turned back to her. Thank you, he said simply. You saved my life. I'll never forget that. Thank you, Sarah replied. You reminded me why fighting matters. She watched from the porch as Chen and Tyler disappeared into the forest, moving slowly but steadily toward the trailhead, toward safety, toward justice. Then she turned back to her ranger station, to her children, and to whatever came next. Tomorrow, the story would break. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. And tomorrow, Sarah Williams and her children would wake up in a world that was a little more just than the one they'd gone to sleep in. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The next morning, Sarah woke to silence. Not the comfortable silence of the forest, but something heavier, expectant, like the air before a thunderstorm. She lay still for a moment, listening. Emma and Lucas were still asleep beside her, their breathing soft and steady. The fire had burned down to embers. Everything seemed normal, but Sarah's instincts, honed by weeks of fear and vigilance, screamed that something was wrong. She rose quietly and moved to the window, peering through the grimy glass. The clearing was empty, the morning mist hanging low between the trees. No vehicles, no movement, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was just after 7 a.m. By now, Chen should have reached Portland with Tyler. The story should be going to print. Within hours, the entire state would know what had happened in these forests, what Thornton logging had done, what Sheriff Kowalski had covered up. By noon, it would all be over. She just had to keep her family safe for a few more hours. Sarah was making coffee on the camping stove, her hands shaking slightly with exhaustion and adrenaline when she heard it. The unmistakable sound of engines. Multiple engines, coming up the access road. Her blood turned to ice. They were here. Emma, she said sharply. Emma, wake up. Wake Lucas now. Her daughter jolted awake, instantly alert. She'd learned to recognize that tone in her mother's voice. What's wrong? They're coming. Multiple vehicles. We need to go. Now. Sarah was already moving, grabbing the packed bags she'd prepared, checking the rifle. Remember what we practiced. Out the back, into the forest. Follow the creek downstream. Don't stop, don't look back. Go. Emma grabbed Lucas, who was crying and confused, and pulled him toward the back door. Sarah took one last look around the ranger station, the place that had been their refuge, their home, their battleground. Then she followed her children out into the cold morning. They ran. Sarah could hear the trucks now, 3, maybe 4 of them, pulling into the clearing. Doors slamming, voices shouting. Sheriff's department. Anyone inside? Come out with your hands up. Sarah, Emma, and Lucas crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes and faces. Behind them, Sarah heard the sound of the ranger station's door being kicked in. Men shouting, searching. They're not here. Check the back. They couldn't have gotten far. Find them. That last voice was Kowalski. Sarah recognized it, cold and furious. They'd come to silence her, to make sure no witnesses remained. But they were too late. By now, Chen would have reached Portland. By now, the story would be in motion, unstoppable. All Sarah had to do was stay alive long enough for it to matter. They reached the creek, its water icy and rushing with recent rain. Sarah grabbed Emma's hand. Lucas already on his sister's back. In the water, Sarah gasped. Walk in the water. They'll have dogs. We need to break the scent trail. The water was shockingly cold, so cold it stole Sarah's breath. They waded downstream, moving as quickly as they could on the slippery rocks, the current pulling at their legs. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Men crashing through the forest, calling to each other, spreading out to search. Sarah's mind raced. The creek would take them downstream, eventually to the main river, but that was miles away. And they'd never make it before hypothermia set in. They needed a place to hide, somewhere the searchers wouldn't think to look. And then she remembered something Tyler had mentioned days ago, almost in passing. The old mine. There were abandoned mining operations all throughout these mountains. Relics of the 1930s when prospectors had swarmed the area looking for gold and silver. Most of them had been sealed or collapsed, but Tyler had mentioned one near the ranger station, hidden by decades of overgrowth. A place he and Jessica had used as a backup observation point. If she could find it, they might have a chance. Sarah scanned the creek bank desperately, looking for the landmark Tyler had described. A lightning-struck cedar, split down the middle, growing at the water's edge. There, about 50 yards ahead, she saw it a massive cedar, its trunk split into a perfect V, blackened by an old lightning strike. This way, she hissed to Emma, pulling them out of the creek and up the bank. The mine entrance was exactly where Tyler had said it would be, concealed behind a curtain of blackberry vines and salal bushes. To anyone who didn't know it was there, it looked like just another part of the hillside. Sarah pulled aside the vegetation, revealing a dark opening about 4 feet high, shored up with rotting timber. And she commanded, quickly. Emma hesitated. Mum, it's dark. What if it collapses? It won't, trust me. And now. They crawled inside, the darkness swallowing them. The mine tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch. The air was cold and smelled of earth and decay. Sarah pulled the vegetation back into place behind them, then used her flashlight to illuminate the space. The tunnel extended back into the hillside about 30 feet, then opened into a small chamber where the miners must have been excavating. It was just large enough for the 3 of them to sit. We're going to wait here, Sarah whispered, very quietly. They're going to search, but they won't find us. We just have to be patient. Lucas was shaking, whether from cold or fear Sarah couldn't tell. Emma pulled him close, wrapping him in her arms. They sat in the darkness and listened. The sounds of the search party grew closer, voices shouting, dogs barking. Sarah heard them pass by the mine entrance once, then circle back. Check that hillside, it's just brush. Nothing here. Check it anyway. Footsteps approached. Sarah held her breath, her hand tightening on the rifle. If they found the entrance, if they looked inside, she would have to fight. She would have to kill, if necessary, to protect her children. The footsteps stopped right outside. Through the thin curtain of vegetation, Sarah could see a shadow. A man standing just feet away from the entrance. Asterisk, please. She prayed silently. Please don't look. Please don't see. An eternity passed. Then nothing here. Moving on. The footsteps retreated. Sarah released the breath she'd been holding, her whole body trembling. They'd been inches from discovery. Inches from the end. The search continued for hours. Sarah and her children huddled in the cold darkness of the mine, not daring to move, barely daring to breathe. They could hear Kowalski directing his men, his voice growing increasingly frustrated as time passed and the fugitives remained unfound. They couldn't have gotten far, a woman and 2 kids. Keep searching. But as the morning wore on, the search became less organized, less systematic. The men were cold, tired, frustrated, and then, around noon, everything changed. Sarah heard a new sound, the distinctive thump of helicopter blades. Multiple helicopters, approaching fast. Through the mine entrance, she caught a glimpse of them passing overhead. Not sheriff's department birds. These were news helicopters. And behind them, more vehicles were arriving. These ones with official state seals. Sheriff Kowalski. A voice boomed through a megaphone, authoritative and commanding. This is Special Agent Morrison, Oregon State Police. You and your men need to stand down immediately. We have a warrant for your arrest. There was a long silence. Then Kowalski's voice, no longer confident, but desperate. This is a county matter. You have no jurisdiction here. As of 1 hour ago, you have been suspended and are under investigation for corruption, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. Your jurisdiction is terminated. Drop your weapons and surrender now. What followed was chaos. Sarah heard men arguing, heard Kowalski shouting orders that were being ignored, heard the sounds of vehicles starting up and driving away. Some of Kowalski's men were fleeing, others were surrendering. The empire was crumbling. After what felt like forever, Sarah heard a different voice calling out, Mrs. Williams, Sarah Williams. If you can hear me, it's safe to come out. This is Special Agent Morrison with the state police. We're here to help you. Sarah didn't move. It could be a trick. Mom, is it real? Emma whispered. Are we safe? I don't know, Sarah admitted. Then they heard another voice, one that made Sarah's heart leap. Sarah, it's Michael Chen. I brought the cavalry. You can come out. It's over. That voice she trusted. Slowly, carefully, Sarah pushed aside the vegetation and crawled out of the mine, her children close behind her. The clearing around the ranger station was filled with vehicles, state police cruisers, unmarked sedans, and the news vans with their satellite equipment. A dozen officers were securing the scene, handcuffing Kowalski and 3 of his deputies. And there, standing next to a man in a state police uniform, was Michael Chen when he saw Sarah and her children emerge from the forest. Filthy and exhausted but alive, his face broke into a relieved smile. Thank God, he said. When we got here and found the place empty, I thought, we're okay, Sarah said, though her voice shook. We're okay. Special Agent Morrison, a tall woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached them. Mrs. Williams, I'm so sorry for what you've been through. We came as soon as the story broke this morning. The Attorney General has opened a criminal investigation into Thornton logging, and as you can see, we're already making arrests. She glanced back at Kowalski, who stood in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and defeat. You and your children are safe now. We're going to need your statement. But first, let's get you someplace warm. You're all hypothermic. The next several hours passed in a blur. Sarah and her children were taken to a hotel in the nearest city, given warm showers, hot food, and medical attention. Lucas's asthma was treated, Emma's cuts and scratches were bandaged, and Sarah was given something to help her sleep, though she refused it. She needed to stay awake, to stay alert, to make sure this was really happening. Michael Chen visited that evening, bringing with him the front page of the Oregonian. The headline read, Environmental Activist Murdered, Logging Company and Sheriff Implicated in Cover-Up. Below it was a photo of Jessica vibrant, alive, smiling, and next to it a photo of Tyler giving his testimony. It's everywhere, Chen said. National news picked it up within hours. CNN, MSNBC, all the networks. The Attorney General held a press conference this afternoon. They're calling it one of the biggest corruption scandals in Oregon history. What about Tyler? Sarah asked. He's safe. Protected custody, medical care. His leg will heal, though he'll probably have a limp. But he's alive, and he's going to testify. Chen paused. He asked me to tell you something. He said to tell you that Jessica would have liked you, that you have the same kind of courage she had. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should have done. That's where you're wrong, Chen said gently. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have looked the other way, would have protected themselves first. You risked everything for a stranger, for the truth. That's not nothing, Sarah. That's extraordinary. The legal proceedings that followed took months. Kowalski was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and a dozen other felonies. His trial was swift and brutal. With Tyler's testimony, Jessica's evidence, and Sarah's account of what had happened, the prosecution built an overwhelming case. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Marcus Thornton, the logging company owner, was charged with environmental crimes, bribery, and conspiracy. His company was dissolved, its assets seized. He received 20 years. 6 other company officials and 3 more deputies were also convicted and sent to prison. The murdered environmental activist, Jessica Moore, became a symbol of the fight to protect Oregon's forests. Laws were changed in her name. Penalties for environmental crimes were strengthened. Oversight of the logging industry was increased. Her death, tragic as it was, had not been in vain. As for Sarah and her children, life began to change in ways they never expected. The story of the widow who had hidden a fugitive and stood up to corruption captured the public imagination. Donations poured in from across the country. An advocacy organization offered Sarah a job as a community liaison, helping other families who'd been victimized by corporate negligence. It paid well, came with benefits, and most importantly, it gave her a purpose. They moved out of the ranger station, though Sarah kept the location secret, turning it into a private retreat where she could go when the world became too loud. She bought a small house in a town 2 hours away. A place where Emma could go to a good school and Lucas could get proper treatment for his asthma, where they could rebuild the life that had been taken from them. Tyler came to visit once his testimony was complete. He still walked with a cane, and probably always would, but he was alive, and he was healing. He and Sarah sat on her new porch, watching Emma and Lucas play in the yard. I've been thinking about what I want to do next, Tyler said. I can't go back to field activism, not with this leg. But Chen introduced me to some people at the Environmental Law Center. They think I'd be good at legal advocacy, using the system to fight instead of just documenting abuses. You'd be excellent at that, Sarah said. You know what you're fighting for. You've paid the price. That matters. Tyler was quiet for a moment. I still have nightmares, he admitted. About that night in the forest. About Jessica's scream. About lying in that crawlspace thinking I was going to die. Do you? Every night, Sarah said honestly. I dream that Kowalski finds us in the mine, that I'm too slow, that I can't protect them. I wake up in a panic, and I have to go check that Emma and Lucas are still in their beds, still breathing, still safe. Does it get better? I don't know yet, Sarah said. Ask me in a year. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. To people who had been broken by the same cruel system, and who had somehow survived it. Thank you, Tyler said finally, for my life, for not looking away. Thank you, Sarah replied, for reminding me that some things are worth fighting for. 2 years later, on a cold November morning, Sarah drove back to the ranger station. She hadn't been there since that terrible day, and she wasn't sure why she felt compelled to return now. But something pulled her back. Some need to close the circle, to confront the place where everything had changed. The access road was even worse than she remembered, barely passable. When she finally reached the clearing, she stopped the Bronco and just sat for a moment, staring at the building. It looked smaller, somehow, less intimidating. Just an old, abandoned structure in the woods. Not a battleground, not a hiding place, just a building. She got out and walked slowly toward it. The door hung open, just as it had been left. Inside, the room where they'd lived was empty. The fire was cold. The makeshift furniture they'd built was gone, either taken or rotted away. But the space still held echoes. She could almost hear Lucas's laughter, Emma's serious voice, Tyler's grateful whisper. This place had been hell, but it had also been where she'd discovered her strength, where she'd learned that she was more than a victim, more than a widow trying to survive. She was someone who could fight, someone who could win. Sarah walked to the back corner, to the spot where Tyler had hidden. The floorboards had been pulled up completely by investigators, leaving the earthen crawl space exposed. She knelt down and looked into it. Such a small space. How had he survived in there for so long? How had any of them survived? But they had. Against all odds, they had survived. Sarah took a deep breath, stood up, and walked back outside into the clean November air. Behind her, the ranger station stood silent, its secrets exposed, its ghosts laid to rest. She thought about David, about the man who had kissed his children goodbye that last morning and never came home. She thought about Jessica Moore, who had died fighting for what she believed in. She thought about all the people who had been crushed by systems that valued profit over people, who had suffered in silence because fighting back seemed impossible. We didn't let them win, she said quietly to the forest, to the ghosts, to herself. They tried to bury us, but we survived, and we made sure the truth came out. The wind moved through the trees, a sound like agreement, like absolution. Sarah walked back to her truck, got in, and drove away. She didn't look back. There was no need. That chapter was closed. A new one had begun. And in that new chapter, Sarah Williams was no longer a helpless widow living in fear. She was a fighter, an advocate, a survivor who had looked into the face of corruption and power and had refused to blink. She was a mother who had taught her children, through her actions, what courage actually looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to do what was right despite it. The ranger station faded behind her as she navigated the rough road back to civilization. Somewhere ahead, Emma and Lucas were waiting for her, safe and happy in their warm home. Somewhere ahead was a life she had fought for and earned. The wilderness had tested her, had tried to break her, but she had emerged stronger. Not unscathed, she would carry the scars forever, but stronger. And that, she thought as she turned onto the paved road, was what mattered. Not that she had avoided the darkness, but that she had walked through it and come out the other side still standing, still fighting, still human. The end.